Hey friends, my name is Sherry. Also on my channel is So Fire Locks. So friends, today I'm just coming to you with a quick story time. And pretty much I'm just explaining what transpired up to the point for me deciding to get a full hysterectomy. So maybe when I was probably 25 years old, and this situation has been going on for a very long time. So right around the time that I was 25, I was pregnant and discovered that I had fibroids. So the fibroids during that time, they were small. My doctor also during that time would tell me not to worry about them. It was no big deal. And he would literally go in with 4 clamps and just pull them out. At that time, it was like little small tissue, maybe about this big. It was just small enough and big enough just to cause a little bleeding during my pregnancy, which also caused me concern. So for him to relieve my concern that I have, he literally just, he will pull them out. And I believe we had to do that maybe 2 or 3 times in my first 2 pregnancies. Um, so it's been 25, 26 years ago. So leading up to this point now, maybe about 19 years ago, I was diagnosed with endometriosis, and I was doing a bunch of work like outside of my yard. Then I would just notice that the more I moved around, I was bleeding, but it was definitely not time for my menstrual cycle. So I remember the craziest thing. I was with my ex-husband, but he was there, my fiance. So I was with my ex-husband. Here it is. I'm like bleeding, doing work. And also I noticed that like if we were having intercourse that I would bleed too. So I pulled him. I'm like, I don't know what's going on. You better make sure that I do not have any diseases or you don't have any diseases, because if you do, there's going to be a problem. So I pull him. We're like, I'm calling my doctor. We're both going to see my doctor. So when I get there, I'm like, I don't know what's happening. However, I think this man has given me something. I need to be checked, and then we need to figure out how he's going to be checked. So she comes back and she's kind of laughing at me. This has been my doctor since I was like 21. And I think at the time I'm probably about 33 or so. I don't know. So she's kind of laughing at me and she's like, you definitely don't have anything. So, sir, you're safe. You don't have any diseases. There's nothing to worry about. However, you do have what we call endometriosis. So that bleeding that you have been having, that abnormal bleeding on the outside of your period, is because you have this endometriosis, and that is when the lining grows on the outside of your uterus and it sheds throughout the period, before the period, even after the period, it sheds blood. So it's getting rid of um, old cells pretty much. So instead of it going on the inside of the uterus where it's supposed to, everything, it collects this lining, this tissue, extra tissue collects on the outside of the uterine wall. So that had been going on. I'm like, so how do you get rid of it? I don't remember my doctor ever stating that it was a cure, but what we did do, we did this little endoscopic, and I'm not pronouncing the name correctly, but we did a surgery to make sure that it wasn't cancerous. It was this whole thing for her to go in into my uterus and scrape it just to make sure that it wasn't cancerous, and really to kind of rid itself of it. Also, I knew that I would be married soon, so the expectation was after the wedding. So this was like in April. So the expectation was after we were married in August that we would definitely try to have a kid together. So I was told during that same procedure, the end of April, that the chances of you getting pregnant is slim to none. However, you are young enough, and women do go on and have very successful pregnancy, but because of this extra tissue is lined up so thick on your uterus, the chances of the sperm actually passing through is probably slim to none. And in the event that you do get pregnant, you probably won't be able to carry this child to term. So that's what I was told. So she scheduled us to come back for this procedure, and they went in, like she scraped some tissue on the inside. Then she took this huge needle. The needle had to have been about this long, but it seemed like it was about this long. She put it up in my vagina, and I'm telling you, she put it up in the vagina, and that little bit of hole was enough, which it wasn't designed to help me get pregnant, because I had, during that visit, came to the conclusion that, and the reality that maybe a pregnancy just wasn't in store for me. So I'm just gonna leave it alone. But me and my then fiance, we together, and literally when I went back for the results, then there was no, when we went back for the results, maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, because it was right around Mother's Day, the day after Mother's Day that year, I found out that I was pregnant. And my kid now is 18 years old, and he is literally the joy of my whole entire life. Like my son, I love him so much. I have 2 daughters and I love them too, but I'm super crazy about my son, and everybody knows it. He's my only son. But anyway, so fast forward, I'm dealing with the endometriosis. Everything was just so, it was bad. I'm having these really long periods and heavy periods, where before it was like just a difference in a day, the difference that a day makes. You know, prior to, my periods were 3 days. It was a light day, a heavy day, and a day when it was weaned off. That's the way that it was really throughout my 20s. And right around the beginning of my 30s, I'm like, this is really bad, because now I'm having these really painful instances where it seems like I am bleeding all of the time. So now that I know I got the endometriosis part, well, this endometriosis diagnosis, I'm like, this is just something that I have to deal with. A surgery was never, ever, ever on the table for me. The doctor, my doctor then, she was like, well, we could try birth control and we could try to regulate it. But it wasn't just the period that we were regulating. It was the fact that I had these fibroids that were coming and had been coming. And I didn't, if there was a cure for that at the time, I just wasn't aware of it, because I honestly do not remember myself and my doctor even discussing it. I think we were more concerned about making sure that it wasn't cancerous, and my cervix contained no cancer. So the instructions was just for us to watch it every year, and that's what we did. But right around, I would say maybe about 5 years ago, my periods became so heavy that I then needed to wear the nighttime pads literally all the time. I could not wear a panty liner. I could not wear a regular pad during my menstrual cycle. I had to wear a nighttime pad literally all of the time. And those are those huge pads that come from the front of your back, like from your uterus all the way to your butt. Like they're this freaking long. So I'm wearing those. I'm not knowing when I'm going to come on, when I'm not going to come off. I knew when I was coming on for my regular cycle, because it was always 27 days exactly. And then, but during that cycle, I would shed like old blood, you know, which would be like brown blood. My clots were huge. I would be passing clots like this big. I am severely anemic, and now that I know that that very well could have had something to do with it, I would bruise. My body would be so black and blue where it looked like someone was literally beating me, and that was definitely not the case. But the bruising on my body was so bad. Also, I would have faint spells, like I would get so overheated that I would literally faint, or I would feel faint, and I would just have to sit down and just find a way to cool myself off. I started taking iron shots, and I would take some iron pills. The iron pills did not help me. They actually made it worse, constipated. So now I am living in a new life where I had to accept the fact that I have endometriosis and I'm severely anemic, and my blood count is low, and that's just where I live, between the my numbers being between like 6 and 8, and I think they were supposed to be around 11, maybe 11 to 14. I've never made it to that point, and it's been over 20, almost 30 years. So I'm going through this, the extended periods, and I developed these migraines. So now I'm living with extended periods, irregular periods, migraines. I am having sharp pains in my uterus and my cervix, just my groin area, that absolutely hurt. They would just come and go, painful periods. And maybe the last 5 years, I start having really, really bad back pains also. So right around the time of my period, I'm just having bad back pains. Now my period is lasting maybe a week or so, and but I'm still bleeding between the actual normal cycles. Like I could never ever tell when I was gonna have a period, and it was no longer like it was originally when I got the endometriosis diagnosis. Like if I'm doing any extra work or anything, or strenuous work, or even with intercourse, it was no longer that. It was just pretty much whenever it felt like it. Migraines lasted. I was literally having migraines probably every day. I then get prescriptions to treat the migraine, but nothing about the, again, hysterectomy had never been brought up. And also during this time after my son, I had never ever been checked again for fibroids. So just to fast forward it to this past year, back in October, the bleeding ramped up, and it was to the point where I could not have intercourse, because if I did have intercourse, I would bleed during that time. And the oddest thing was that in the event that I had a regular period, the only thing that really was giving me some relief is if I actually had intercourse during the time. Like I hurt so bad. I know it's odd, but it hurt so bad. Like my butt hurt. Felt like my bottom, my uterus was literally coming out of my body. Everything just hurt so bad. Like I hated being a girl. Like I honestly felt like it was a curse. I absolutely hated being a girl, hated being a woman. I just could not believe that all of this stuff was happening to me. I felt like there was no relief, like this was my new normal, always feeling just unclean. You have to shower all the time. It was just so much. Like it was just so much. So the whole time, really after October, now my periods are not coming every single month. They're like skipping a month. And I'm thinking, okay, well, I just turned 50, so maybe I'm going through menopause. So go take a pregnancy test. Definitely not pregnant. But then I'm not pregnant. So is my cycle late? It's never been late. It was just a regular and more consistent. So find out that I'm not pregnant. Then it got to the point where I couldn't lift my legs, like walking up steps. I'm so exhausted. I am so tired, literally all of the time. Go to work one day and I'm like laying up against the wall trying to get some relief. My back is hurting, my butt is hurting, my stomach is hurting, vagina is hurting. Literally everything is just in freaking pain. So I leave there, go to the emergency room. Fast forward all of this in 30 years, just trying to give you like the high level overview of it. Go to the emergency room. I'm like, I am having contractions and I am not pregnant. I have taken a couple pregnancy tests. I am not pregnant, but my stomach, my uterus is actually contracting, and this is the best way that I can describe it. And they do an MRI, do a CAT scan, and say, okay, yeah, you have a couple kidney stones, and you also have some fibroids, and you need to have an emergency hysterectomy. Like you literally have to have an emergency hysterectomy. You need to do it now. So now I'm up in this emergency room like hell. The doctor had the worst bedside manners. He couldn't answer anything. Everything I asked him, he was like, I don't know. I'm like, where did they come from? I don't know. How long have I had them? I don't know. Well, what size are they? They're huge. It's quite a bit. You have a couple of the size of, he said you have a few. So you have some small kidney stones, but then you also have these